to give you a little history about Vantreight family. And snoozing is optional, but no snoring. That annoys other people. What I'm going to cover today is some history, and from any angle you'd like, as I said. Where we came from before Victoria, as far as the Vantreight family, the past up to today's generation, with a whole lot in between. A lot of the time, we're going to have lots of time for question and answers at the end, or like I said, just put up your hand and ask away. Next slide. So who am I? I'm Ian Stewart Vantreight, born September 24th, 1951, third floor, Richmond Pavilion, the same delivery room that my kids were delivered in. So I'm the eldest son of Jeffrey Arthur John Vantreight, and Jean Beckwith McLeod, or Jean Vantreight, née Beckwith. And I'm the third of 7 children, all of us still around pestering the world. So as you can see, there's a fair bit of information there. My sister Stephanie did this offspring chart for Mom and Dad, and the 52 down in the bottom is inaccurate. It's now 55 since May of 21. Next slide. So I openly admit I'm not a grower, and my brother Mike was. He loved the dirt. I loved the office, doing the office administrations, and it should have been a match made in heaven. And I love to fix things, and I saw this the other day, and it sums up how I feel when I fix something. I thought, he's good. Gotta like it. Next one, Paul. So, where we came from and when. How many people assume that Vantreight's were Dutch? Yeah. Well, it's actually Vantreight, if you do it in Dutch dialect, and I butchered it because I'm Canadian, I don't know a word of Dutch. But the route we took, our family took, went back to 1880, where my great-grandfather and his 2 brothers moved from Ireland. They lived in Dublin, and my great-grandfather was a structural engineer in Dublin, and there's still a bridge that he designed and organized to be built in Dublin. And they wanted to move to the new country, and came over from Ireland in 1882, and first arrived in New England, went down to the Carolinas, overwintered in Texas, and because they were heading to San Francisco, where they had bought a 100-acre parcel of land there. And so they stayed in San Francisco for a couple of years, but didn't like it because it was too foggy, and somebody heard about this island up north, and the land was a lot cheaper up here, and so they made the trek up to Victoria. I don't know if it was somebody didn't get here on the days we have fog and rain and wind, but they moved over and moved into Gordon Head at that time. Next, Paul. So my great-grandfather and his 2 brothers, as I just mentioned, San Francisco, when they got here, they bought 3 100-acre parcels. If you can see that little map of Gordon Head there, basically they bought from San Juan down to the waterfront to Torquay was the 300 acres that they purchased and paid $2.50 an acre. And at that time, there was a great hullabaloo because the land title office, which was down at the end of Fort Street, still there now, it's an insurance building, I think, but that's where the land title office was. And they were selling off these 100-acre parcels all over the place. And a fellow who bought 100 acres where the Memorial Arena is, he wanted to put a piggery in there. Well, it failed because it was just a big rock outcropping and he couldn't grow anything on there or produce anything. So he gave it up for tax sale. Now when he bought it, he paid $2 an acre. When the government went to resell it after they repossessed it, they charged $2.50 an acre. So if you go back to late 1800s, you'll see the articles in the Times, or the Colonist back then. The outrage of the government profiteering on the citizens, and oh my gosh, it was just because it went from $2 to $2.50. Next slide. So they farmed in Gordon Head for 4 generations, growing fruit, vegetables, and flowers in the fields and in greenhouses. This was commonplace in Gordon Head. For those of you who knew the Gordon Head area, there was the Hoolahans and all the families around Gordon Head. There was a lot of agriculture going on at that time. In the beginning, without so much as a cow path out to Gordon Head, keep in mind, at this time, the downtown was James Bay, okay? So there wasn't even a cow path out to Gordon Head. So they had to go all the way around from the inner harbor out to the inlet at the base of Paul's Terrace, where they would beach the barge at high tide and then unload all the supplies that had been shipped out, load it on the horse-drawn wagons, and have it hauled up to the farm at the time by the Chinese immigrants. So it's something that was commonplace until you found out that there wasn't a road. And like I said, there wasn't even a cow path. Next one, Paul. So my grandfather, Jeff Sr., was the first real farmer in the family, as I mentioned, because his dad was a structural engineer and didn't have much of a green thumb. Then my father, Jeff Jr., took over the farm and ran it after his mother, Ahmad, passed away at an early age. And so that's my grandfather there in 1903. Next one. So I thought this might be interesting, especially for the women in the room. So this was my grandfather, Jeffrey Sr.'s response when he asked Maud to marry him. And she said she would think about it. Okay? So now I've read this, it's pretty hard to read, but I'll read it to you, because a woman's question. Do you know that you have asked for the costliest thing with made by the hand above, a woman's heart and a woman's soul and a woman's wondrous love? Do you know you have asked for this priceless gift as a child might ask for a toy? Demand what others have done to win with the reckless dash of a boy. You have written my lesson of duty out. Man like you have questioned me. Now stand at the bar of a woman's heart until I question thee. You desire your mutton shall always be hot, your socks, your shirts be whole. I desire your heart to be true as God's stars and pure as heaven your soul. You desire a cook for your mutton beef. I desire far better thing. A seamstress you're needing for stockings and shirts. I look for a man. I look for a man of many things. As king for the beautiful relationship called love, and who the makers shall look upon as she did at first, and say it is very good. I am young and fair, but the rose will fade. From my soft young cheeks, some say, will you love me when the petals have fallen, as you didn't, as you did mid flowers in May? If your heart and can anybody read that? Oh. Is your heart and so deep and wide, I may launch my all on the tide, or working for women, fruits and heavens and or hell is. Oh, I've only read this 100 times, and I should have pre-read it. Is your heart and soul so deep and wide that I may launch my all on its tide? The day a woman finds heaven or hell is on the day she became a bride. I desire all things that are grand and true, all things that a man should be. If you can only do this, I will stake my life to be all you demand of me. If you can't do this, a launderer and cook, you can hear with little to pay. But a woman's life and a woman's heart are far more earned that way. Did he know what he was getting into? I thought that was, I've got that in my office at home. I haven't read it for a long time, obviously. My apologies, but I thought it might be interesting to see a little bit where some of the genealogy came from my grandmother who passed away at an early age of tuberculosis. Next one, Paul. Okay, back to the history. The family slowly sold off bits and pieces of Gordon Head properties to buy more land out on the peninsula and expand operations. Gordon Head operations ended in 1990 when I subdivided the last 17 acres left to build the new facilities out in Central Saanich we did in 1990. From the beginning to the end of operations in Gordon Head, my father created a successful farming business amongst many others in town that eventually grew to us farming over 850 acres and producing over 15 million daffodils a year and thousands of tons of produce a year. One of Dad's proudest accomplishments, besides the chaos that he used to create being on Saanich Council. How many remember Dad on council? He had a flair for being in the news. His proudest one was the working with the Canadian Cancer Society. Next one, Paul. So in 1958, Dad and 3 ladies in Toronto, because Dad would go down east every December, because being a seasonal flower, we'd ship all, flowers down east, but they wouldn't hear from us for like 7 months out of the year. So he'd go down and do a meet and greet and whatnot. And he was going for dinner with one of the brokers that he was using in Toronto, Wally Floody, and he said, mind if Betty comes along? Her and a couple of girlfriends have got a harebrained idea they want to run up a flagpole with you. So it was just before a Leafs game, so they went to dinner, and Betty, Mary, and Judith came up with the idea of selling daffodils for the Canadian Cancer Society as a fundraiser, and that was in 1958. And this grew to where the Cancer Society, not just the Canadian Cancer Society, because they did it in the States. The Cancer Society sold hundreds of millions of daffodils all over the world, besides the United States, but in Europe and Australia. And funny story about that is I was just happened to head to Australia for a vacation, and we got into Brisbane when their Daffodil Day campaign just started. Now, I'm going to go down and see what these guys do. And surprisingly, they were doing the very same thing that we were doing up here when they started up here. And like I said, they did it in the States. Buffalo, New York was the first one to do it in the States, and then it got to the point where all the U.S. cancer societies were selling daffodils. And then I helped, surprisingly enough, in Dublin, Ireland, the Cancer Society there called to see how to work this around and make it work. And then I just stumbled on the one in Australia, so it was all over the world. To this day, the Canadian Cancer Society's logo is still a daffodil. Not a really good one, but it's a daffodil. Next one, Paul. So in 1982, Dad created G.A. Vantreight and Sons to beat, at the time, Premier Dave Barrett's plan to bring back succession duties again. And that was a creation that had a number of flaws that eventually contributed to the end of the G.A. Vantreight and Sons and the farm. And what I mean by that is, like there were 7 of us. 2 boys, 5 girls. And Dad was old school. That, the boys did the farm like he did for his dad, and his dad did for his dad. And the girls did that other job that, involved bare feet and pregnant or something. I'm just repeating how it was. I'm not saying that it's right. So all Dad could see was his 2 boys running his farm and carrying it on. So the flaw in that was, when he built the partnership, was he gave all of us the same say. So Dad had 1/3, I had 1/3, Mike had 1/3. Now, did he consider, do we work well together? No. Do we get along? Yeah, sure, we can socialize and do stuff. But you get us into a boardroom, I would see black, Mike would see white. And that was the way it was from day one. And when Dad passed, because he was always the tiebreaker, it became 50-50. So the problem became, who does staff listen to and who makes the final decision? And that was the big flaw in the whole partnership that was set up in '82. And I go and do speeches on this, on succession planning for farms. I've done it a number of times, as to what not to do. And the first thing I tell them is, make sure, I don't care if there's 2 people, is that me?
That's you.
I'm gonna get rid of this thing?
No.
is to make sure, I don't care if it's 2, 3, 5, 10, make sure that there is a mechanism in your structure for your succession of whatever you built, of making decisions. And somebody has to have the final decision. And that's what wasn't there. So it became untenable when I would go and tell a worker, okay, I want you to do this, and then I come back an hour later and he's doing something else. I said, well, what are you doing that for, Jack? He said, well, Mike came by and this is what he wanted me to do. So they didn't know who to listen to, because they knew I had 50% of the say and Mike had 50% of the say. Now, some fonder memories. Yes, that's me up on the top left. That's the 7 of us and my grandmother on my mom's side. And the next one over on the right is how we used to pick daffodils. We weren't allowed to pick them until they were wide open. But the mentality of purchasers in stores is a daffodil goes like this, goes like this, it goes like this, it goes like this, and then it's going to die. So if I get it like this, it's going to last longer. Here's your little tip for the day. You got daffodils? You want to bring them into the house? Wait till they're wide open. Why? Well, think about it. Mother Nature's got this plant going through a process. And that process is to reproduce. So when the flower opens, the bulb says, oh, you're about to get pregnant. Okay, here's a shot of energy, juice, whatever you want to call it, to go up to the flower to withstand getting pollinated. So when you shut that and cut that off from the bulb, whatever's in that stem is all you got for that flower. And you can do it. You can do this test yourself. Pick one that's like asparagus. Pick one that's wide open at the same time. Put them in vases, and I'll guarantee you the wide open one will outlast the one that's asparagus. So Dad's fondest off-farm activity was the original daffodil special in 1963 with Grant King. And that's Phil Lambert there with Dad and Grant and Alan Smith in the car at the time. That was the first one. And this picture here was in 1977, so about 14 years later. And then there's the Motley Crew when we won the Strawberry Cup at Western Speedway one year. And we used to do all sorts of things with the community. That was a float. That's actually on Shelbourne Street, is where that truck is. And then the last one, I had to throw a picture in of Ryan, my son. He was doing deliveries and had stayed out a little late that night. So they were loading his truck while he was getting a nap. Next one, Paul. So that's my dad on the left. That's me in 1952, and that's Jeff Sr. And then that's my son Ryan, his son Cassius, and me in 2012. So those would have been the generation moving forward with the farm. Next slide. So I'm going to read this to you. I do know these ones better. So the one on the left is mine. And this was in 1961. I was in grade 3. I'm going to be a farmer when I grow up. I have yeah, I'm going to be a farmer when I grow up. But I like driving tractors and trucks and cars. I like to boss people around. There is one thing that I don't like, and that's That is hiring lazy people. I was in grade 3. Grade 3, 25 years later, my son Ryan. When I grow up, I'm going to be a farmer like my daddy, and I will grow flowers and carrots and things. Grade 3. Next one, Paul. So I've covered a whole bunch of stuff here, and I didn't see any hands coming up. So I wanted to leave lots of time for question and answer. How are we doing for time, Barb?
We're doing good.
Okay, so, and I mentioned this to Stu coming in. You can ask whatever questions you want. I'll answer any question you want. I mean, I just put on all the numbers that I was always told, well, you don't do that. You don't tell people those things. Those are private. Well, no, they're not. They were in the bloody Times Colonist, so it's not private. So, ask me any questions. I'm happy to answer them. Please do. Yes?
This is not a question, it's a comment. When I was growing up on a farm on Old West Road, in the late 50s, Dad decided to expand operations and include growing specifically daffodils and tulips and a couple of other things that the pheasants ate. So in my senior high school years, I would get off the school bus, trudge home, put on my dungarees, and go out and pick daffodils that went in the truck that went to Vantreight Farms. So I know what you're saying about the flower having to be at the exact degree of openness. And I remember how your hands are so cold in February, March out there, and they would snap as you were putting these bunches together, and exactly how to lie them in the box, and making sure, initial them off, there's the right number, and then the next morning Dad would go over to Jeff Vantright's to pass them along to you. But in my senior years at Claremont, I had a boyfriend who was at UVic, and he thought that he would send me a lovely present at Easter.
I'm guessing, but go ahead.
I think I could recognize which balloons they were, because I probably picked them myself.
Yeah, back then there was lots of daffodil farmers on the peninsula, all the way out to Souk, out in like Dooney Flats, because my grandfather used to farm that land out there in Dooney Flats, out where the co-op station is at the end of what's now the
West Shore Parkway.
Yeah, Parkway, West Shore Parkway. So there used to be hundreds of them, and it wasn't just daffodils, because as you said, there was tulips and iris and the Houlihan's and paddens and all.
Have the greenhouses down on Shore.
Yeah, and there was the like you say, like Barb says, the creeds and the ricos, and there was the carnations. That was a baseball team that I never got drafted to in Little League. It was called the DRCs. Daffodils, roses, and carnations were Dad, Leonard Rico's dad, and the creeds that grew the carnations.
Here's a question for you, sorry. How many people worked for Vantreight Farms as a teenager?
My niece did.
That surprises me, because if anybody, at times we used to hire, at the peak we were doing 15,000 T4s at the end of the year. We actually employed more people in, other than the government, than thrifties and whatnot. Yeah, hang on.
Yeah. I grew up out here. When I moved out here when I was 13, we lived on the corner in Byington in Jervin. And back in the 60s, I remember Vantreight's had used the land across the street from Viaduct and put potatoes and daffodils in there. And now it's a sanctuary for birds. But if you take the path along to Camosun, you can see you can pick daffodils. It's just beautiful through there. They still pop up. Potatoes didn't still pop up.
On Panama Flats,
Yeah.
we bought that in 1980 from Bill Edge, who used to have that as a dairy farm. And on the highland there, where you see the daffodils still today, is where we planted the daffodils. Obviously, we couldn't plant them down in the flats because they would drown out every year. But that was awesome land for growing the potatoes and vegetables. Lots of fond memories. That was when Dad was in his heyday on council, and this isn't a shot, this is a fact. I mean, Dad used to get a thank you Christmas card from Crown Royal. And from Eddie Goodwill too, because he'd go to the liquor store and get a case of Crown Royal, like a case, right? Not a couple of bottles, he'd get a case. And then next one he'd go over to Goodwill Bottling and say, Eddie, I need a case of Canada Dry. And he'd drive around with that in the back of his Jeep all day. Next question.
This isn't a question, it's just that I would like to tell you that I played tennis with your mother, and she was an absolutely delightful woman, not a great tennis player, but absolutely delightful. She was just a warm-hearted woman.
Well, she's not was yet.
Is she?
Yes.
Mom's
No,
still
I told you
Mom's
that
still
last
kicking.
time.
I'll just give you a little update on Mom.
Wow.
She's 98, turns 99 on July 29th. She's of late had some difficulties. She's still living at the house on Tyndall
Yeah.
Avenue at 4437, where I was born. No, I'm sorry, I wasn't born there. I was born down Tyndall Avenue in one of the other houses while they were just building the house, the flat roofed house on Tyndall, and moved in when I was 3 months old. She's still living there. She will not go into a home. She says, this is where I'm gonna go meet my maker. So now she had a stroke 3 weeks ago, and ended up in the Jube, came back out, or in Vic General, came back out and had to go back in for some issues that she was having, but she's still kicking
Wow. I didn't
and
realize that. I think
and
that's fabulous.
doing great. Yep,
Lovely lady.
yep. Proud of her.
Yeah.
Next one. Yeah, that one that you just thought of, like that's not going to be interesting. Yeah, it will be. I'll make it interesting. Come on, Stu, you got a question? I know you do. Oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
remember your dad when he was on Saanich Council. My husband and I were having a problem with the Saanich Council. And your dad had quit smoking. And he was sitting at our kitchen table, I had the coffee out and everything, and he had this cigarette, and he never lit it. And he said, I quit smoking, but if I don't do this, I'll have to light it.
Yeah, and that's what Dad did.
Yeah.
He quit smoking, and he literally mauled them to death. There were these soggy cigarettes all over the house, and so there was a plentiful supply when we were kids that we could have cigarettes. But yeah, he did it in the council chambers too, which pissed Howard Sturrock off. But
This was Mel Kubelair days.
oh yeah, that's before Howard. Yeah. Stu.
Yeah, and when you guys used to hire the planes and put the daffodils in, how many daffodils did you stick in? I went up with Alan Roy when I reloaded one of those planes. They just literally took truckloads of daffodils out there.
Yeah, we would take flat decks and we'd put a plywood box on the back of them because we didn't have any covered vans back then. We just bought leftovers from Bigger Teeny, just call Heaney, for those of you who remember that. So Dad would buy all their leftovers. So we'd build these boxes on there. On a 16 or 18 foot deck, we could get about 500,000 blooms on the truck. And then we would go out, and I can remember this one time we were at Pat Bay when they just put the new terminal in, and what they asked us to back in because we couldn't go out on the tarmac anymore for security reasons. Oh, there's a plane out there, and you want us to back under the lean-to here and unload everything by hand, which ended up not being a good idea because what they did was got us to back in under this lean-to, and there was about that much room between the top of the truck and the lean-to. And so the guy just said, okay, keep coming back, and he knocked the fire alarm off. But yeah, those planes, back then, they were like DC-3s and DC, and the old prop jobs that would have to make 3 gas stops to get to Toronto. And we just lay all the seats down, load them all in, and off they go. Now, when I was running the farm, there was times, because sales and marketing was my purview, where we missed the season with the orders for the Cancer Society. And I 3 times had to do this, but the biggest one was the Quebec division. Their order was about 3 million blooms. I flew to Scotland, went and inspected the fields, and hired a 757 this is just a freighter, like no seats in it, it was front and back, was just daffodils. And so for $450,000 for a trip from London to Mirabel, I would have thought for that kind of money, I'd get something better than the jump seat behind the captain and the co-captain. Honest to God, it was that wide and about twice as long. And that's what I got for $450,000. And not even a stewardess.
You were probably supposed to be the stewardess.
I ended up making coffee for the captain and co-captain.
I knew you'd be useful sometime.
Who's got a hand? Yes?
Be quick, because we're going to change.
I just wondered, first of all, I'd like to say your comments on succession duties are so important, and I'm sorry that your farm ended up with so much dirt, right? But no pun intended. And the other thing, I just wondered if where Legion Manor is built, was that Vantreight property at one time?
Legion Manor? Legion Manor?
Where all the daffodils are behind it, you know, that it's an extended living facility.
Where is it? Down for Prairie Inn.
Refresh my memory.
Yeah, that's where I worked.
Where's Legion Manor?
Down
You
near
know,
the
the
Prairie Inn.
Central Saanich.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those fields on either side of the.
Yeah, those are properties that I rented from now the owner of the farm, Rob McDonald and Sherry Bridson. They bought that from the Rashleys and from Danny Danzo. They bought those property along with a lot of other property they bought. But yeah, we would rent that, and those are all flowers that got left behind when didn't get picked up properly.
Yeah.
Yep. And you can pretty much guess any daffodil you see along the highway was as a result of growing them out in Central Saanich, bringing them all the way back to Gordon Head where the grading and sorting and cleaning and dipping processes were for the bulbs, that, you know, a flat came off, or back then we used to ride on the top of the stacks of bulbs, you know, back then. And, you know, they get freely thrown at things across, you know, trying to hit the signs. Not that I ever did that. Well, look, I've given you more than you probably were banking on, and I'm glad to see that nobody was nodding and I didn't hear any snoring, so thank you.
for coming today, and welcome to the Royal Oak Schoolyard. Now, of course, in a schoolyard, we tell stories. And today we have Mike Lawrence joining us to tell some stories about growing up in the late 50s, early 60s in rural Saanich. So if we're going to tell stories, we need to have characters and a place and a time. So let's start with our characters, and our main character is Mike. Now, Mike, most people who attended Royal Oak School only knew you as Mike Brown,
Right.
but now you're using Mike Lawrence. So can you just let people know how that came about?
Yeah, when we first came out to Royal Oak, my stepfather was named Brown, but I wasn't legally, legally adopted. So I went through all my Royal Oak days as Mike Brown, but when I hit 16, there was a lot of legalities involved, like driver's license and stuff like that. So I had to go to my legal name, which was Lawrence.
Thank you. Now, as for a time and a place, when did your family first come to Saanich?
It would be, when I was 8 years old, that would be 1951, and we lived in a house across, it was called East Saanich Road then, the highway, and we were across from the Beaver Lake exit. So we were there for just 1 year. And I went to that little school, I forget what they call it, but the little two-room school or one-room school.
Yeah.
For 1 year.
So that was before the Pat Bay Highway came through.
Oh, heck yeah, I can remember them cutting it through.
Yeah. And then, but then your family left for a while and then came back again?
Yeah.
Okay.
We moved out to Langford for only about a half a year, and then the family joined up with another family, and we bought a house on Viaduct Avenue. And subsequent to that, my dad, he bought out the other partner, and so the family just had, we were just single family then. And that was, we called it back then the third trestle. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but if I told somebody where I lived, I'd say the third trestle, and they knew what I was talking about. And back then, the old railway line was quite pronounced. It was still quite obvious cutting through there, out into urban. So I had to make new friends because I went to Strawberryville School until grade 6. And then when it came to go to grade 7, I thought I was going to Colquitt's. And they came along and said, no, you're on the wrong side of Viaduct, you're going to Royal Oak. And I had met a new group of friends, and among them Gary Quayle, who many people probably recognize the Quayle name, and another character named Robert Petrie. And his dad was director of the observatory at that time. And Robert was a bit of a screwball. He was very intelligent, but he was a screwball. One of his antics was we used to drive up to the observatory on a weekend night. One guy had a car, and we'd hang around up there, and when it was time to go, we'd all jump into the car, and Robert stayed there, and when the car took off, Robert took off down the mountain, running right down the mountain. And he always beat us, and when we got down to the bottom of the hill, he would be leaning against a tree, smoking a cigarette, real casual. And we could never beat him. So I think Susan remembers hearing the squeal of tires. And
Indeed, I do. So Mike's 2.5 years older than I am. So when he was a wild buck tearing up and down in cars, I was tucked into bed and asleep by 9 o'clock at night. But remember, this is rural Saanich, and our house was on the east side of Observatory Mountain, Observatory Hill, and I can remember on a Saturday night hearing the squealing of tires coming down the hill. Now, if you had told me that I would wind up married to somebody in that car, would I have believed you? Never.
Well, I kept her awake a few other times too. When I was 15, I bought a motorcycle. And it wasn't in very good shape, but I fixed it right up so I could get 40 miles an hour out of it. But I had no lights, no brakes, of course no license, no driver's license, and no muffler. And I had a girlfriend over on Cadova Bay Heights, and I used to run over there at night and take all the back roads up interurban, across to Old West, down to Brookley, down Brookley to the highway, and then up to Cadova Bay Heights. But that thing made a bit of a racket. And the cops used to chase me once in a while. And I came out one day, going home again, got off Old West Road on the Saanich Road, and as I was turning onto interurban, I could see lights in the distance. And I realized it was a cop car. And I just booted as fast as I could go down interurban. I looked over my shoulder, and sure enough, they're following me. So I decided to ditch. Literally, I swung off onto a driveway that was gravel, and I was still going flat out. Skidded in the gravel, went onto my side and down into a ditch. It was a fairly deep ditch. And I'm lying there, and I can hear this cop car come up, and they stopped almost opposite me. And they sat there for 3 or 4 minutes. I guess they were listening for me. So, anyway, they took off, and I got home. And on Monday, I'm walking up the hill from Royal Oak School. There's a cop car sitting at the top of the hill. And I'm walking. And this cop, he leans out the window and he says, "Hey, you, come here." So I went over there. And he says, "Was that you who were chasing Saturday night?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Where the hell did you get to anyway?" So I told him where I'd gotten to. And he said, "Yeah, we figured you were around there somewhere." But I rode that motorbike around quite a bit. And on Viaduct, going south, the hill comes down. It's fairly sharp to the little bridge there, and then it turned into our driveway. And I could never make it. So I used to go down that hill, up the other one, turn around, and then come back and into the driveway. And one afternoon, I did that. And I come up the hill the other way. Here's a cop car coming. I wheeled around and went tearing down to the driveway, up the driveway, and we had a garage that was about that far off the level ground, a little ramp up. And I went tearing down the driveway, up the ramp, and boom, right into the wall. So I get this guy mine on the ground, on the floor with his bike on top of me, and this cop car comes up the driveway. And he gets out, I got up, and he says, "Let's see your license." Of course, I'm only 15, I don't have one. I said, "Well, I don't have one." And he said, "Well, let's see your insurance." And I said, "I don't have that either." And he said, "I guess it would be asking too much for registration." So, he's almost smirking. You could see it on his face. And he says, "All right," he says, "next time I catch you out on this thing, I'm going to try it out." He says, "If it's not in good shape, I'm going to pinch you." But I had no brakes. So anyway, where we lived there on Viaduct, there was the flats out on the other side of the road. And in those days, there was no beavers, and it didn't flood like it does now. It was just a creek running through it. And At that time, it was farmed by inmates from the Wilkinson Road Jail. They were all, excuse me, it was a jail for criminally insane at that time. And they used to come out and harvest peas and everything like that. And we'd go out there when they're driving out on their flat deck trucks and throwing peas at us and potatoes and carrots or whatever. that all changed.
Just, he mentioned that when he had this bike, that he was also, I had heard it. Again, I can remember being in bed at night. And like I said, in those days, everything was quiet. But I can remember being in bed at night and hearing this thing come, and it had to come around a corner. I remember, and again, I had no idea who was driving it. I didn't find out really until I suppose we were engaged or even married that it was him who was making all this racket as a kid. Yeah.
But that place on Viaduct was a wonderful place to live, and a creek went right through it. It was a tributary to the Colquitt's Creek. And in those days, the salmon and trout were just thick in that creek. I don't know what it's like now, but...
Nothing there now.
Nothing in there now? Oh, man, their coho salmon came up to spawn. Mm-hmm. There was literally hundreds. Yeah, they were great big things, 7, 8, 9 pounds.
Yeah. But you pretty much had the whole peninsula as your backyard.
Yep. Yeah, it was a wonderful place for me to grow up because I like going out into the woods and hunting. I had an air rifle. I used to go out and I used to get the odd pheasant with this air rifle. I mentioned Robert Petrie, whose dad was the director of the observatory. And like I said, he was a bit of a screwball. But we'd go up there and he discovered a way to get into the dome. And we'd go up there, and there was one plate at the edge of the dome where it went around like that, and we could pull that plate open, crawl in, and then we're inside the dome. Of course, we didn't do any damage, but we wandered around the dome. We had to prove our courage, we had to go up to the viewing platform, which was quite a ways above the floor, maybe 30, 40 feet. That was scary. It was narrow and scary. So that's some of the things we did with Robert. And we used to get into the office building too. They had a ping pong table down in the office building. We used to go down there and play ping pong, but we never damaged anything. Okay.
Yeah, another memory I have from living there is on a clear night, I can remember we could hear the dome being rotated. It was loud enough that you could hear down in the valley. You could hear the dome going around. Yeah.
Well, like I say, Robert was a bit of a screwball, and his dad had a DeSoto, big DeSoto car with a fluid drive. And his repair bills way back then must have been $300-400 a month. Robert was a maniac with him.
So Mike, just to finish up today, any thoughts about growing up that you'd like to pass along?
Well, it was a wonderful place to grow up. Yeah. And it was rural. And at that time, like I used to go hunting all the time. I had a .22 caliber air rifle, and I used to wander the hills by myself a lot and wander the woods. And I used to think of kids I knew downtown. I always called them city kids. They were so different than what we were used to out here. And I invited them, one of them to stay over one night, and the next morning I took them hunting. And we're just walking up through the property. You know where it was leveled there, about part way up? We're just up at that level spot, and a pheasant flew over and landed in the bush. And I put a pellet in my gun, went in there after it, and it flew up right in front of me. And it scared the hell out of me. You know what it's like when they fly up like that. And I went bang. That impressed the city kid.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing your stories with us. And thanks to the people, too,
Who
who
contributed, yeah.
who have contributed as well. Thank you very much.